Okay, so hello everyone. I'd like to start off by just saying thanks for the invitation to talk about why my research matters at the Computational Foundry. Just to introduce myself, my name is Dr. Matthew Wall, and I'm an associate professor in politics at the College of Arts and Humanities. My talk today is just going to be about a recent project that I did, where the goal was really driven by the fact that most of the time, as I'm sure all of you are aware of, like scholarly analysis has quite a long time lag, right? And so, if you're working on something like election campaigns, which I am, it can often take a year, 2 years, let's face it, 3 years to actually produce like a research article. Once you get, you have to do the writing, put it through review, get it rejected, do the whole thing again. And so I guess I was driven really by trying to have something that was a bit more contemporaneous. And this culminated in this project that I'm going to talk to you about today, called the Horse Race Politics Project. Okay, so I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, and I really want to go through kind of three key points. So I just want to talk a little bit about like the background, the research background that this project is located in, which is to do really with trying to understand campaign dynamics. Campaign dynamics just refers to like basically shifts in the likelihood that a candidate will win that occur during a campaign. Okay, kind of the ups and downs of a campaign. And I've been using gambling markets to look at that in various ways. So I'll give you just a potted summary of that work. And then I want to focus in on the horse race politics project, which I'll explain. And really the key theme there that I want to develop is how important it is to try and enjoy your research work, to try and take things that you just like to do and make them happen. And how that can sort of often lead to more like concrete or measurable research opportunities down the track. And then finally, I'd just like to talk about like the nature of this particular project, which was obviously to do with the American presidential election campaign. And the events of that campaign and the nature of it meant that this was just an extremely hot topic. So there were lots of opportunities to kind of disseminate the research that emerged, but all in a very short space of time. So I'll talk about how we dealt with that as a team. Okay, so just a little bit about the background, as I promised. So my own specialism can be summarized in this sentence, like what are the effects of election campaigns, right? And that obviously opens up a kind of a can of worms. There are lots of different effects that campaigns might have. The most obvious ones are winning and losing the election for the different actors involved, but they can also affect things like citizen competence or the legitimacy of the political system, the extent to which citizens are engaged with politics, all sorts of stuff. So that's kind of my overview. And I've always been interested in online campaigns. So, that goes back to when I was a graduate student, back around 2005, 2006. And, just being of that generation, I was very into social media, into the internet. But like the academics who were senior to me didn't really perceive that as anything more than sort of a toy, or it didn't have a sort of legitimacy. So I got interested in trying to show, like, empirically, that it did actually matter. So why do I study this? I mean, that's a question I suppose we all ask ourselves sometimes. I just like election campaigns. I think, I reflected on it, and I think it's because I like sports. I like a competition, like a battle. And unlike so many aspects of politics, campaigns have a result that's actually measurable, very concrete, that there's winners and there's losers. And that kind of entertainment dynamic, I suppose, is what really drew me into this topic. I've studied it lots of different ways. I mean, I was really trained in kind of quantitative analysis. And so most of the research publications I'll show you on the next half of the slide are in that tradition. But I increasingly realized that, how do I put this? Like all that kind of quantitative stuff, which gets you good like ref scores, like I couldn't actually talk to my friends or family about it because they didn't understand it. They couldn't read it. It didn't make sense. And so I wanted to kind of broaden out the insights that I felt I could generate into a more like digestible format. And so as part of this research, I increasingly grew to appreciate political gambling data, right? So that is to say that you can bet on elections, right? And the betting odds that you get can tell you how likely the bookies or the people in a betting market think it is that a given candidate will win or lose, right? And so I started to integrate that kind of data into my analysis, initially as a sort of a control variable. So, like if I looked at the betting odds sort of at the start of the campaign, it let me isolate the effects of the campaign, if that made sense. And then I looked into it as a sort of a source of forecasting the election to see whether it performed better or worse than polls. And more recently, I've been looking at it as a way of analyzing campaign dynamics, simply because election markets are open over the entire course of a campaign, like second to second. So they can react very quickly to events in a way that polling struggles to replicate. And so here you can see some of the outputs that I produced along those lines. Probably the big one was the grant that we got from the AHRC. And that was with my colleague Stephen Lindsay in the Computational Foundry, and as well as Rory Costello at the University of Limerick. And so that gave us some of the techniques that we used to collect gambling data for this project. Okay, so with horse race politics, as I said, I just wanted, really more than anything, I wanted to have a podcast. And I wanted to be able to share it with my friends and family and like have the crack, as we say in Ireland, talking about the election. But I wanted to kind of bring to bear a little bit of that research insight that I talked about in the last slide. And so, yeah, the core idea was to do that in real time, so to be collecting gambling market data, and then to use it to make sense of the stories that were happening in the election campaign, and to disseminate this not via a research article, but by a podcast series. So kind of a different approach. Cherish DE kindly provided the funding, and obviously thanks to Heidi for helping out and all the logistics of actually making that happen. I brought in 2 collaborators from media and communication, right, because I wanted to match the storyline of the campaign to the data on the dynamics. And so Richard and Thomas both had different angles on campaign communication, political satire, online campaigning. And then to make it happen, and anyone who's doing a podcast, I'd really advise this, you need technical help, And so I ended up talking to Sam Blaxland, who some of you might know, did the Global Problems podcast series at Swansea. And he recommended Carnival Content, who'd done the production on that. And they were amazing, So really what Stephen did was just made it so we just had to plan out what to say and record it, and he took care of everything else. And then the other side of it is, I think the marketing team deserve a lot of thanks, in disseminating it through the college social media. Kenon helped us with some online advertising. And Sam John came up with the digital design that I'll show you on the next slide. So, this was the design that we came up with for the front page of the podcast. So a podcast needs cover art, it's called. And I thought I was blown away by this piece of design. So Sam this might look familiar to some of you, if you look at the newspapers and you look at the odds on offer in a horse race, this is what it will look like, the colors of the rider and the odds on offer. And so we made it this, not only is this something that's great for this project, but we can then adapt it to other elections, just by shifting the colors and the names. So I was really happy with that. Just to talk a little bit then about, obviously, the campaign was totally mental, right? I mean, I'm sure many of you were watching it. So, just a few highlights. I mean, the debate, the first debate, which you might remember, Donald Trump interrupted over 70 times. Joe Biden called him a clown. There was just, it kind of shocked at the world. And even though it's kind of hard to shock with Donald Trump, obviously Donald Trump was admitted to hospital with COVID-19 in the middle of a campaign where COVID-19 was a central issue. There was stand back and stand by for the Proud Boys, huge kind of racial overtones in the in the campaign, and obviously then the count itself and the sort of denial of the results. So like every day seemed to generate nearly an unprecedented story, and the media was fascinated. And so, you know, this gave me a lot of opportunities kind of around this podcast project. And I think more than anything, what the podcast let me do myself was to sort of make people aware that I was an expert in this space, you know. Um, so this picture sort of on the right here was a university event. So through the kind of Hillary Rodham Clinton connection with the law school. So these were, you know, senior campaign analysts and journalists, and my own mug in the bottom right corner. So I sort of squeezed myself into that discussion. We did an event with the Being Human Festival, which was a lot of fun. And here you see we had actually, I had to write a script, which was mental. But you see here, we had actors actually kind of interpreting, I suppose, how different types of citizens might have reacted to some of the events that we isolated. And then the podcast team sort of talked around that. I was on like Sky News, I was on BBC News, I was on Times Radio. Like once you're sort of in that space and it gets hot, like you're everywhere. And the beauty of it is, and the part I'd really encourage people to realize is that these media appearances, which can seem really terrifying, only touch like 1% of your knowledge of the topic. And so in the end, I ended up just repeating the same 2 or 3 key insights on like 5 or 10 different media platforms. And so it's really not that difficult to do this kind of stuff. And actually with the COVID crisis, it meant I didn't have to travel to London or Cardiff. I could just sit at home on my computer screen. And then, but it's funny because like the podcast got about like 800 to 1,000 kind of audience. But what it enabled us to do was get a series of articles in The Conversation. And I'm sure many of you know we have a partnership with them. And one article, which was quite close to the election day and was kind of based on an insight we had from the podcast, which was basically that like betting markets were a lot more cautious about the likelihood of a Biden victory than polls. Got over 40,000 reads and was the top Swansea University article on The Conversation in the last 3 months. And so I suppose the message of that is, in a sense, it's hard to know what's going to really jump out. But if you sort of put yourself out there and in that space, you get opportunities, and they're not difficult opportunities to seize, because in a sense, you're really just saying the same 3 or 4 things in loads of different formats. And so once you're sort of amenable to that, yeah, you hopefully you can kind of get your research more widely recognized. And it also builds platforms. Like, so there's a couple of collaborations. People have approached me to collaborate again on the back of this, you know, more, you know, academic, let's say, oriented collaborations with colleagues in the economics department, with a guy who works in Betfair as the head of their market analytics. So once you're in that space, people reach out to you, and then it turns into like refable output in the more conventional 2-year delay academic cycle. Okay, so I'd like to finish up there. I'm not sure, I hope I haven't gone on too long. But yeah, I'd be very happy to chat away afterwards.